Says it's sharing. Is that working, Jessica? We good? Okay, cool. All right, guys. Whoa, there's a cable there. My name is Brian, CTO from Rebug. Thanks, guys, for coming out. We are a Angular consulting company. We do stack augmentation. We work with a lot of big clients around here in Denver with their Angular apps, large enterprise projects. We also do training and architectural review. So if you're looking for assistance with your app or you need some training to get kind of up to speed on things, we'd love to meet you, hang out, and see if we can help you. Here at the Rocky Mountain Angular, we have a code of conduct. You can get this on our website. We just want to make sure there's a safe space. Okay, so like Wednesday, October 24th, we're going to talk about Angular schematics. So if you're interested in schematics, come on out. I'll kind of give you kind of the overview of what schematics are, then we'll take a deep dive into actually building your own schematic and how you can use Angular schematics to add things to your Angular projects, generate reusable things in your projects like components and services, and kind of customize them for your organization. So that should be a lot of fun. And that's going to be out at Rebug in Lakewood. If you're coming, just give us a thumbs up online, so that way we know. We're always looking for presenters. Just shoot us an email, meetups@rebug.com. We're really looking to kind of maybe change things up a little bit and go with more of a lightning talk format in the future. Maybe not all the time, but I think this will really lower the barrier to entry, right? Because like coming like the work content. So this is going to be a 10 to 20 minute talk where you can kind of just talk about something that you're passionate about, maybe something that you're doing at your office or your organization, or something that you thought was kind of a neat solution to a problem that you had. So we'd love to hear about that. Just shoot us an email at meetups@rebug.com. We're going to go ahead and just open the floor. We always do this every week if you haven't been here before. So if anybody's looking for work, throw your hand up. Go ahead, man. You want to say something, Jared, or no? You don't have to.
Sure, I'm Jared. Recent graduate of the Turing School, the front-end program.
Oh, cool.
It's primarily React curriculum.
Yep.
But I've been picking up some Angular lately and just here to learn.
Awesome, man. Well, welcome. Anybody else? Anybody's happily employed? Awesome. Anybody looking for developers? In the back? That's you? Yeah, I'm pointing you. Go ahead. Yeah, hey, what's up?
Business, so hopefully that entices some people. We're a database company doing some cool things for enterprises, along with trying some data analytics.
Can you tell us the name of the company or not?
Tahome Technologies.
What is it?
Tahome Technologies.
Tahome Technologies.
Our project is called RoverDB.
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 Cool. Cool. And I assume Angular full stack, front end only?
Front end.
Front end. Lead front end developer. Awesome. So get a hold of, I didn't catch your name, Diane in the back if you're interested. Anybody else looking for developers? Awesome. I don't think we have any housekeeping. You already mentioned where the bathrooms are and stuff. And then we got a couple of announcements before we dive into things. I always like to do a monthly update for you guys. I'm not sure if you've been following, but Angular 7 is the release candidate. 1.0.1, anybody know? I know they just dropped another release candidate. So a couple of things in 3.1 support. So now we're going to get Shadowbound V1 that was just adopted by all the browsers. You may know like view encapsulation in Angular, and this is Shadowbound native. So that's kind of getting that's kind of being deprecated, and we're going with V1. And then we also get slots with NgTemplate. We're also going to get some updates to the CanLoad interface for guards. And then there's also a new lifecycle hook, if you will, for applications. So when you boot up, think about in your app module, when you like bootstrap up your application, there's now going to be a new method called ngBootstrap that you'll be able to hook into and do some stuff when the app first comes up, right? So it's kind of like an application level lifecycle hook. And unfortunately, no ID yet. I know a lot of people have heard about that over the last couple of months. especially the ngConf. So that's the new renderer engine in Angular. It's actually the third version of the renderer, but it's not quite ready yet. So it's not ready for prime time. First candidate. Dive into details, you're welcome to do so. It's probably behind the flag or something. And then Material 7 is also in release candidate. They're going to align that with the 2018 material spec. We're going to get drag and drop. So if you're using Angular material projects, you have to go use something like Dragula or some other library to do drag and drop. We're going to get that built right into Angular material. There's going to be a bottom sheet component to be able to like kind of open up like a quarter of your screen, like bottom sheet on the bottom to do any sort of actions that you want. And then they're coming out with also new and improved schematics, which will be great for us if you're using Angular material. We also have a great announcement coming up. We're going to be doing an evening of Angular. Has anybody been to one of our evening of Angular events? We got a couple of people. Steve, tell us what it's about. I'm going to put you on the spot, man. Go ahead.
It's awesome because it was at I don't know what venue it's going to be this time, but it was at a really cool theater. It was maybe fun. Up to the Hero podcasts, leaders in the Angular industry.
Yeah. So we're going to run out of big space. We're going to bring in some nationally recognized speakers and just have a really nice evening. So more details will be coming out on that. So you can check out Breebug.com for updates. We are live streaming. And that's it. Oh, wait. Sorry.
We're all going to go to Ratio Beer Works.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I
afterwards,
saw that.
Which I didn't have a slide for, but.
Where is it? Is it just down?
It's 29, no.
I suppose I could
right
just use
there.
Google
It's
Maps,
like
huh?
Not even a block away.
All right, cool.
Next
So
door.
come
Yeah,
join us
next
afterwards if you want and hang out and do some more networking. We'll have a nice evening together. We'd love to get to meet people that I haven't met. And I know Jesse would love to meet you guys. He's our CEO. So without further ado, Kevin Schuchard here at Breebug. He's one of our senior engineers. And you get the privilege of kind of learning some of the stuff that he's been doing for us around testing. So without further ado, Kevin, go ahead and teach us a little bit about testing, man.
Cool. Thanks, Brian. All right. You guys ready to learn about the good parts of testing? Right. So I had fun putting this together. This is going to be a quick lightning talk, kind of like Brian was saying. So if you guys have any ideas, it can be real simple. Just put a couple slides together. You don't have to do an example app. Just kind of share what you know. So working at Breebug, I have the privilege to see a lot of different applications and see how people do things differently. And testing is a real interesting subject. It varies very widely across organizations, from very strict testing regimens to some companies that they just don't have the budget for it. They just don't believe in tests and don't do any testing at all. So I've seen the tests and do pay off in a lot of ways. So if you're not big on testing, you're probably the first question you have is why? Why do I want to test? And one of the big things is quality, right? Like we spend a lot of time working on our actual source code to make sure that we deliver a solid product that does what it's supposed to do. And tests help reinforce that. They're just another metric that we can ensure that the things we're trying to do actually do that and continue to do that over time. And over time, we can ensure that whether a new developer comes on the team or we ourselves come back to that code in 6 months, right? We still understand what it does, and then it still functions as we originally intended to. And the third thing that's probably not often thought of is documentation, right? Tests can serve as a form of documentation, both in the pseudocode that they explain as you write your test. So it can be very helpful if you're learning to do something. You can go into a test suite and see all the different ways that the original developer intended it to work. And one thing I always find interesting, I'm sure we've all run into an application where we have that one file that no one wants to touch, right? It's like a ticking time bomb. It's almost all but wrapped up in caution tape. And recently, I came across one of those, and it's the comment that was left around this file is kind of my all-time favorite warning of that. But if you can read that, it says, "Go get a strong painkiller for the inevitable headache, and feel free to check sanity at the door." So this file was about 3,000 lines long, and I'm sure practically no one on the team knew what was really going on there. But you know, whether or not anyone understood what those like 5 inside, I had a good idea of what it was supposed to do. So whether you know what's going on in that code, you can at least wrap some tests around the functional output so that either A, when the time comes to go back in there and refactor it, or B, you're actually forced to go in there and touch that code, that you can do it with more confidence and know that you're not introducing 5 more bugs with your single change. So if you're on board with testing, we're going to talk about 4 different testing types that I think you can incorporate into your application and kind of the different ways to use them. So the first one, most of us probably know, is unit testing. And unit tests can be used for, you know, practically everything within Angular. So our components, pipes, directives, and services. And the great benefit is that these are really fast. And they stay fast by keeping them isolated and low level. So if you have a root component that has, you know, 5 or 6 nested components in it, all down, test all their interaction. Component calls out to a service that's making an async request. In the sense of a unit test, you're going to want to probably mock those out, right? You're not going to want to actually make the service call. You're going to set up a spy or a stub and mock out that response. And you're really testing at the method level, really, if you're thinking of a component or a service, and making sure that things are working in a real detail-oriented manner. The other way, another area to add tests to are going to be end-to-end tests. So these are going to be our high-level, kind of really business-critical paths. So this may be login, right? I want to stub out a login flow to make sure before we deploy that still works. Or maybe you have a checkout process or some sort of critical business logic. And really, we're just testing happy paths here. We're not going to go, like at a unit test level, we may go into every branching chain and just make sure that it works. E2E tests, they can be a little brittle in the sense that there's a lot of dependencies, right? You're usually booting the entire application up and then stepping through that flow. And so we want to keep these simple. We basically, what we want is a sanity check, right? Does this app still work from a high level as it did before? A third area, which is not generally classified as a testing area, is static testing. And this is really comes down to our linter in Angular applications. So we're using TypeScript. We have TS-lint, and we usually have a TS-lint.json file that has a whole bunch of rules in it, right? That we probably just look at it once and then never go in there again until the editor starts yelling at us and we Google how to fix it and delete a TS-lint rule. But if you think about it, the linter provides 100% code coverage for free. That intense, you get those red excluded lines a couple times, but it really helps us enforce language best practices. And you may find that you need to spend a little time with your team coming up with, like, okay, what do we believe in as an organization or group? Like, what are the rules we want to enforce? What are the best practices? Do we want, parentheses wrapped around our parameter calls or not? Things like that. And again, you can think of this as part of your style guide as well. And the last one of my favorites, is integration tests. And this is really where unit tests meet end-to-end tests on a lot of different fronts. And so you get the cross-cutting coverage of an end-to-end test with the unit test control and speed. And so what this looks like is very similar to a unit test, where you have the test bed in Angular, and you'll pull in all the components and the providers that you want. But you can test a checkout component inside of a larger one. You can see how that interacts. Maybe it acts differently if you service customers in Europe versus America, right? Instead of spinning up some sort of browser and stubbing out an a European user versus American user, right? You can set those in the service. You can mock those in the provider. And then you can make almost all the same assertions that you would from an end-to-end point in the DOM, but in a unit test-like way. And they're still very fast, lots of control, and they provide a lot of value. So one of the great benefits of Angular is that we get a lot of this for free, right? We have Protractor and Jasmine and Karma out of the box. And so we're big fans of Jest as a unit test runner and Cypress to replace Protractor. So for your unit tests, to get these things, it works fine, whether using Jest. It is the same. There's an E2E script in the package JSON, or if you use something like Cypress, it's as simple command as that. For our static testing, that's going to be hooking up. One of the things I like to do is hook up NgLint as part of some sort of pre-git hook, whether it's pre-commit or pre-push, right? We don't want to push anything up to the repository that hasn't passed our static analysis. And then integration is just as simple, right? It's going to use Jest or Karma. It's the same ng test, and you can bundle those in right with the rest of your unit tests, right? You don't have to we only run the end-to-end tests before a release, whereas we run the unit test on every push, those sort of things. You can just slot them right in, and you still get all those benefits of more cross-cutting tests. So I think we're good on time. We're going to look real quick, a little bit of code. So I take a look at links out, but this is it. It's got links to a demo, but from a high level, spent a lot of time on this, and we basically got two components, right? This pizza and taco orders, and they both reuse this order component here. Very simple counter, right? Yet each one uses it in a slightly different way. Obviously, like when we're on pizzas, we're displaying pizzas. Tacos is tacos. And so I've got, can you guys see that? Okay, let's just look at these one at a time, maybe. There we go. So we're looking at unit tests first. Pretty standard stuff. If you use the NgCli, you usually get one of these for free. This gives you all the, in a lot of ways you have to do a little bit more work than you're used to with Angular. Usually you give it something that just works. Here we have to declare everything that the test needs. So we're testing, if we look at the view for this, we have some elements in here, and then we have this other component, right? This order display. And so if we just put the pizza order component, which is the one we're trying to test in here, Angular is going to yell at us and say, I don't know what this order display is, right? Is this a custom element? Is this something else? So we need to provide a value for that. And one way to do that is to provide a stub. And so just like we would with a normal component, we'd create a class, define any inputs that are on it, and then use our @component decorator and provide the same selector that the regular component has. And then we just pass an empty template. Because in a unit test, we don't care what else is in this pizza component. There could be 50 components in there, right? We're just testing. So we created what we call compile components. This is all pretty standard. We basically get a reference or an instance to the component. And then our tests become pretty low level, right? We can set the properties on the component. So this counter just adds one to the count property. So I make sure that the counter is 0. I call add 3 times, and then I expect the count to be 3, right? Very low level. It's very contrived in this example here, but if you had a service method or component that was doing a lot of detailed stuff, right, you could just narrow in on that functionality and test only that. Same thing here. We've got remove and a couple other tests. So let's compare that to the integration spec. A lot of similar things here, except now we're actually pulling in that order display component. So we're getting a token for the actual component, and we again call compile. We get a reference to the component, and here lean towards what you would see in a end-to-end test. So the component instance returns a reference to the native element. So we get the pizza order element and the actual order display element. So this is that nested element there. And again, we just call a query selector passing the string. And then our tests still look very similar, right? We're querying for that button, add pizza. We're calling click three times, but now we're able to test how the pizza component interacts with the order display component. So I would expect when we're on the pizza tab that the output is the full output that we saw, this order 3 pizzas. If we come back over here, I'm expecting this 1, 2, 3 output. And so we still have all the control, we still have all the speed. We're not building the app, we're not deploying it to test this, we're not having to click through, some 10-step checkout process to get down. In the mode and really still test, hey, when these two components are together, this is how they act. And the same thing happens if we come over to the taco integration, right? I can expect that the tacos, go to the add one, right? It's a completely separate expectation. And then this is set up with Jeff, so obviously very fast. Jeff's offers a lot of functionality, but here's all our integration and unit tests running together in a couple seconds, right? And we just tested end-to-end like functionality very quickly, very stable. This is not going to be as fragile as an end-to-end test would be. And another example real quick, I set up a few tests with Cypress. And so this is a replacement for Protractor. It's built on a completely different offsets that aren't possible with Protractor, but I'll give you a quick demo, very similar to the Jasmine Mocha syntax, the jest syntax, right? You still order with describes, and then before each of these tests, right, I'm going to visit this route. And then I'm going to grab the button that contains the value add, I'm going to click it 3 times, right? And then I'm going to expect that the component's H3 value contains 3 pizzas. So very similar to the unit integration test. So if I run yarn Cypress, in this command with the open, it actually comes with a GUI interface. So make this bigger. But you can run individual tests or run the whole suite. And you can actually watch it step through the integration. You can come in debug, in a sense, your end-to-end tests. So you can step back through the assertions, you can see where it's finding it, it's finding the ads, it's actually clicking it, you can see in the DOM there. And then you can also, one thing that's really helpful is you can inspect the DOM at this point in time. So let's say you're not sure what's going on, you want to see what's on the DOM at this point in time, right? Like I'm on the taco page, I can see that my, where is it? Router link active class is there, right? Maybe you've got some sort of scenario where you're trying to inspect what's actually happening during these tests. So Cypress is really great. It has a CI mode too, which runs in a headless version and does video recordings. So in the repo, you'll see there's a video, so it'll actually show the test. You can go back. And so that's the end of my presentation. Hopefully, about tests, and I hope you guys, if you're not writing tests, maybe consider writing a few more, and hopefully leverage each type of test for the strengths that it has, and not just throw them all into one grouping. So, thank you.
Awesome, thanks, Kevin. That Cypress looks really good.
It's nice.
Maybe we can get somebody to present on doing Cypress the whole time.
Maybe.
It'd be awesome.
Very cool. All right, we're gonna take a quick break. Let Jesse kind of come up and get wired in. So if you want to use the bathroom, grab another beer.
Otherwise, I mean, what you want to do. Yeah, I'll see that. I get a lot down bars. I can work on myself. I never did this. Oh, right. Showed somebody how to do this thing, like a band. So
All right. You got everybody back? Jeremy's in there fixing the cake. Okay. Thanks guys for coming out. Part 2, we're gonna have Jesse Sanders, CEO of Rebut. He's gonna give us a talk on I'm not ready for NgRx. So I don't know if you're on the NgRx train or not, but he's gonna talk about maybe an alternative you can use if you're not quite ready for NgRx and maybe you're kind of making that migration. And I think he'll talk a little bit about why this solution is a great middle step before you adopt NgRx if you're not ready for full implementation of that. Yeah, Jason.
So this is a different thing than price, yes?
Yes, so do you want me to answer that?
We'll get into that.
Yeah, he'll get into that and talk about NgRx and what it is and those kinds of things. So without further ado, Jesse Sanders.
Hey, whoa, come here. Before we get going, you know I'm gonna do it. You know I'm gonna do it. So Brian's been a big part of the community for the last 5 years, writing blogs like crazy, doing talks, really making a huge contribution to the community. And so, about what was it, a month ago or so, I just kept pushing him towards this cliff and pushing him towards this cliff, and finally he just fell off of it, and he went ahead and applied for Google Developer Expert in Angular. He went through the interview process, 2 long interviews, and a really long wait process. We've been sitting here going, you know, we're just sitting here in the back, and all of a sudden he comes up and he shows me the email. I can tell just by the color scheme. Here's Denver's newest Google developer expert in Angular, and happy to have you be part of the team.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
All right. Now, most people say I'm loud enough. I don't really need one of these, but we'll see. I've also got to we got to do some screen sharing. All right. I got this power cord thing. All right. Share the entire screen. Excellent.
Oh my goodness. That's
Oh, wow. I love that. Woohoo. All right. So let me hook this up first. And hook this to my back pocket. And there's one last thing that's really kind of important to do, and that is put my phone on airplane mode, because otherwise it will pick up every last text, message, email, or whatnot coming through. All right, so are we good on the live channel? All right, excellent. I'm gonna ditch this seat. I don't want this. So thanks everybody for coming tonight to Rocky Mountain Angular. I'm super happy that you're here, and I'm really excited to be here. Been doing a lot of traveling lately. I just spoke in Indianapolis. They're kind of teasing me a little bit about Cypress.io. I just did a great talk at Indy on Cypress.io. I'm really excited about it. So if you haven't used it, go check it out. It changes how you do testing. We'll probably be doing a meetup on that at some point here really, really soon. So I'm really excited to talk about that as well at some point. Also got invited to the Teamworks, the Frameworks Summit. Brian and I both went out there, and I taught a one-day Angular class out there. Apparently, John Papa wasn't able to make it, so I was able to fill in, and really happy about being able to help out the community there. So it's great to learn about the different frameworks and how change detection works between the different ones, and just kind of the similarities and the differences, and how much we all work together. So, I forgot. Let's get so I'm coming down with a little bit of a cold, and I forgot my cough drop. So Jessica was nice enough to bring some. All right, so this talk is really about NgRx and what if I'm not ready? You know, we talk about NgRx and is it not gonna work? Oh, there we go. Maybe it will. There we go. When we start talking about building applications, a lot of the buzz right now is all around NgRx, man. You need to use NgRx, man. It's really going to help and make things better. And what if I'm not quite ready for that? What if this is like, I just need to find a way I can kick off my application and get stuff done and not have to worry about some of these more complex pieces. So there's a lot of things like NgRx, NgRx Actions, NgXS, NgRx Data, MobX. Anybody heard of any of these? Yeah, anybody using like NgXS, NgRx Data? No? So there's all these choices out there, and it's a little more as a developer when I'm starting an application, how do I deal with this? As well as if I already have an application that has a little bit of complexity, but I'm not quite there yet to say, hey, I'm ready to bite the bullet to do NgRx and do it right, then this talk is for you. This might be a really nice intermediate step for you, and also give you the ability to then have an application that's ready to go to NgRx. Because that's the other really big thing here, is making sure that our applications are extendable and that we don't code ourselves into a spot. So when we talk about NgRx, there's a lot to learn with NgRx. We got actions, we got reducers, effects, selectors. So we think about actions. We need to have an action for every single thing the system can do and the user can do. So it's a little bit overwhelming. So we think about, okay, I want to load all customers. Okay, so I need to load customers. I need to load customer success. I need to load customer. And then we have to write reducers for each one of those, effects to handle the service calls that are going out, and then selectors to be able to get the data back out of the store. Wow, right? That's a lot to take on when I'm starting to just try to build an application and get things going. So, you know, the first thing that we start to think about is, do I even need NgRx? You know, there's so much planning involved. actual application complexity comes up. It's like, well, it seems kind of simple right now. I know there's a couple of pages that have a little bit of complexity to them that I could use a little bit of help with, but I'm not sure that I'm really to that point where I'm ready to bite the bullet with NgRx. And I want to start simple, right? When we kick off an application, we want to get going soon, right? We want to get going right now. Let's start building some stuff and let's start seeing what we can produce here and start to get some feedback. And then the really big question here that I always think about is, what if I want to upgrade later? So there's other patterns out there that I can implement, but they don't really lend themselves well to being able to upgrade to NgRx later. And so then we kind of get ourselves coded into a corner, and then before we know it, things get complex and bam, we're kind of hosed. So we need to have a way that we can find an intermediate here. So architecture goals with this is we want to maximize code reuse. I know this has always been a buzzword, like, man, let's create components that we can share between teams. And you could use my components. I don't really like your components as much, but here's mine. You can use them and whatnot, right? Anybody ever have that, right? Not me, of course. So maximizing code reuse so that we really have reusable components and not components that are that we're going to have to do a lot of extension on or create a lot more complex decision trees inside of them so that they'll work for our use case. The other thing we want to be able to do is share share data between components. So a lot of times we need to share between multiple components, and then we're trying to figure out what's the best way to share it. Who has like a session service right now in their application? Anybody? Come on, don't lie to me. I know we all have some sort of service that, hey, we're first going to put roles in there, or first we'll actually start usually with something innocuous like, hey, I'm going to put the user's token for authentication. Put their authentication token into the service because, hey, it's a singleton. It'll be available everywhere. We'll be able to get that out of the service, and we'll be able to put that into our HTTP calls, right? And then we add roles to it because, man, if we've got the authentication piece, man, we're going to want roles, and we want to check that later. And then, before we know it, we start adding some other things like permissions and a little bit bigger, and we keep adding and adding. And it becomes like this file that Kevin was talking about earlier. Before we know it, it's 1,000 lines of code in it. It has a header, says, do not touch. This thing's toxic. You will break. And I've been there. Like, this happens. It's really easy to get there. So sharing data between components isn't always easy. And the other problem with this kind of shared data is we're storing it as an array or as a single object. And so then the problem is we come up with this other scheme to update and tell components, hey, man, roles have changed. Permissions have changed. This other entity has changed. You need to update yourself. You need to go get this data and re-render yourself. So it's not a real efficient way of doing things. And so really what we want to do is we want to stream the data. So when we get new data that comes in, we want to be able to update the stream, and then the stream updates and tells all the components, hey, you have new data. You need to go re-render yourself. And the other thing that we want to do is one of the goals of NgRx, and why you'd even consider NgRx, is to reduce complexity. So even though we're not using NgRx, we still want to reduce complexity, right? We still want our applications to be simple, be easy to work with, easy to maintain, and easy to extend. If we're writing really complex applications that are difficult to add on to and maintain, we're kind of defeating the purpose here. The other one is scalability. These applications need to be able to scale. So kind of similar with what we were just saying on the reduce complexity. They need to be scalable. They need to be able to, we can add to it. We can take it to NgRx if we want to, or we can continue to make more complex pages within our application if we need it. All right, so let's talk about a few core concepts here. Who's familiar with Container Presenter? Couple hands, few more. All right, great. So this is probably the #1 thing that I've been teaching people lately is Container Presenter. It's the one pattern that if you start to master this, it will change how you develop code. Okay, and Container Presenter is also known as smart components and dumb components. This actually comes from Dan Abramoff, and when we talk about Redux, this is some of the original thinkings and design around Redux as a pattern. But it actually has nothing to do with Redux itself. It's just a really nice way of developing components. So we'll get into that a little bit. The other core concept we're going to talk about is service with a subject. Anybody heard of service with a subject? Besides Brian? Nobody? All right, excellent, great. So we're going to learn about service with a subject and why that's important and how that is going to change the game for you, combined with the container presenter pattern. Okay, so when we talk about container components or smart components, these are top level features or pages typically. Now there's some exceptions to that, but if you think about it, if I have a dashboard, that would be a container. It would have a bunch of other components in it called presentation components or presenters. They can contain child components and they can contain other containers. But I usually try to tell people, like, start out with just seen as a container as being a page. And then if you happen to have a group of presenters, the presenter components that are being reused over and over on pages that all have the same exact logic that you're copying, now you have a use case to create basically like a sub-container that can be shared across these multiple pages, and we can isolate that logic to a single set of source. So what do containers do other than be top-level features, right? Well, they control page flow. They decide, how to go load data, where we're going to save things, how we're going to handle events, okay? So they're handling all the events from child components and then deciding what happens. Who has components right now where in the child component, when they go to click on something, it says, hey, if this variable, whether it be an input or from our lovely session service that we all have, we don't want to admit, that we, if this session service dot variable equals this value or is within this range, then my component should react like this. I should go ahead and save it, insert it. And then otherwise, let's go ahead and do the update, right? So we can actually eliminate all of that logic, and the containers then will receive child events saying, hey, look, somebody said save on this. Somebody clicked this magic button here and I'm supposed to tell you about it. And then your component, your container can decide, what are you going to do with it? How are we going to react to this? So it kind of leads into now the presentation components and understanding what presentation components do. Their primary job is present data. They don't know where it comes from. They don't understand it. They just go, man, I'm going to make it pretty. I'm going to make this the best looking UI you've ever seen. But if you ask me where the data, I don't know, it kind of came from above and I got it, and here it is. Look, it's all in its glory. I've made it look really nice for you. And then I make things pretty. It knows nothing about services, stores, anything like this. Okay, if you start to your presentation components have services and stores in them, those are now containers. They're not presentation components. You're breaking the pattern. So the other thing that they do here is they defer. What I mean by that is that they're very simple components, and instead of saying, hey, look, somebody clicked on the product, hey, I know what to do, I'll go do this. No, they defer and say, hey, somebody clicked on one of these things called a product. I don't really know what it is, but I'll tell you about it. So, hey, here's the product they clicked on. What do you want to do with it? And they emit an event up to the container. Okay, now the container to their presentation components or something like this, using inputs and passing data down to them. Anybody? A few of you? Okay. Who's not going to answer or raise their hand no matter what I say? Anybody? No? All right. No, I didn't fool anybody. Dang it. All right. I can usually get at least one of you, usually Alex, but depends. So as I said, they're going to raise events to the parent container, defer. So let's take a quick second here before we get into the what if my page is simple part. Why do we do this? Well, so when we talk about wanting to share components, the number one problem that we have is Michael will write a component. And he'll put a little bit of logic in there saying, hey, if this condition occurs, or actually he'll usually write it just for his needs, and then I'll get it, go like, hey, this is a really nice component. That's pretty much everything I needed to do, except for it doesn't quite do this one thing the way I want. So then I'll have either an input that I'm passing in, or I'll bring my service in, and I'll say, hey, condition exists, then do it like this. Otherwise, go ahead and do it how Michael does it. And Alex comes along and says, man, this is a really nice component, but it doesn't quite work the way that I want. So I'm going to either get another service, or maybe that service already has it, or I'm going to pass it in as an input. And I'm going to say, hey, if this condition exists, do it like this. Otherwise, check the other condition. Otherwise, go ahead and do it like Michael wanted originally. And then you come along and go like, well, this is a really nice component, but all this is garbage. She takes it, copies it, rips all the stuff out of it, and puts it into her project or her page the way that she wants it, right? So are we really creating reusable components? No. And in fact, what we're actually creating is components that are going to create really bad scenarios for us, often during testing or during the application, when it's running in production, where all of a sudden the component starts behaving in a very unexpected way. And it's because we're not expecting the value to get updated from the session service or this other place, and it gets a wrong value. And now it starts working in a way that we weren't quite expecting for our page, okay? So the idea here is that if we defer what's happening up to the container can decide, and we have a very reusable component. The containers themselves are the ones that are going to orchestrate everything. So the question here is, what if my page is really simple? What if I'm going like, man, do I really want to create, like I got a page here that's got a grid on it, okay? And on that grid, I'd have a container that would actually load the data, handle the click events, do whatever it's going to do, right? And we have a presentation component that would display the data just for the grid. It's only 2 pieces. It's pretty simple. Should I do this? Should I actually like go through this process? Yes. My answer to you is yes, do it anyway. Kind of an old adage is it only takes one person that shows that they don't care to silently give everyone else, the other developers, permission to come along behind you to just, the original guy didn't care about it. Why should I care about it? I'll just slap this down and we'll just keep going, and we'll just add to the problem. So it's really simple to be able to create containers and presenters. We can do it very, very quickly using the Angular CLI. You guys are all using the CLI for generation, right? It's nice and easy. I can key these things up really, really fast. The other nice thing here by doing this is I can avoid subscriptions. When I'm going to pass the data down from the controller or the container down to the presenter, I'm using async pipe. It's nice, it's clean. And I send the data right down. We'll actually take a look at some examples here in a few minutes, but I can avoid subscriptions. I'm not doing any sort of weirdness here. The async pipe really helps with that. And I get consistency. When I go back to look at this application a year from now, and I start to look at some code, I'm like, who wrote this? You ever had that? And all of a sudden you realize it was you that wrote it. And you're like, oh my God, I thank God I don't code that anymore, right? But especially when we don't do things consistently, that really happens. It jumps out. We're like, well, why did I choose this? Why? All these pages are all done the same way except for this page. Consistency is a really big deal, and especially when we're introducing new team members into the application, and then, oh, well, yeah, but then there's this page, right? You really want to avoid that. The other one is keep it simple, silly, as I like to say. If you're doing things consistent, it's going to be a lot easier to explain it and work with it later. So let's talk a little bit more and see a visual here on Container Presenter. So you might be able to see up the top there, it says App Customers. You all see that? And then I've got my square brackets around customers. So I'm setting over here on my presentation, it's got an app input for customers. So I'm creating the App Customers presentation object from within my container, and I'm passing it customers $. I like to have the suffix of $sign on any observables that I have. That way I know that this is a stream and it's not just a standard old variable. This will become more important to you later when you start doing more advanced. But you can see there, I'm using the async pipe. So I don't have to say, like right now, most people, how they're doing it is they make a service call, they go get the data, they make the service call, they subscribe to it, they take a local variable and now set it to the data that came back, and then they'll pass that, they'll use that in their component, right? And then we need to make sure that we deal, if we're doing any operations on that, we might need to unsubscribe to that, make sure that properly gets released, and then we're not wasting memory away. But in this case here, it makes it nice and clean. I just use the async pipe, and as you'll see how we actually get this data down, we just say, hey, my observable equals the call to the service. I don't subscribe to it. I save 3 or 4 lines worth of code every single time. Makes it really nice. And then on my click event, I have a click event here that is for my presentations click event. I want to have a handler here to call to be my click handler. So this is where whatever they click on in the form, and they're like, hey, click, on something, that I'm going to now handle that at my container. And all my presentation component is going to do is receive whatever was clicked on, and then raise the emit the event up, and then my container is going to get it. This is actually, I don't know if you noticed, but this is actually the same slide I use when I'm describing NgRx, because this pattern's exactly the same. And so I just actually borrowed the slide because it's exactly the same way of doing it. So let's talk about what a service with a subject is, because this is actually where the real power here is. And this is a big reason why I wrote this presentation, is because I've heard a lot of talk about service with a subject, but I've seen very few examples. There's very few articles out there. It's not a really well talked about subject, other than saying, hey, you should really consider service. Is it? Well, one, it's, we don't even write it in this class we're going to do differently, but overall, it's just an injectable service that works like every other service. It has a local variable that's going to be exposed that we can get our data from. So instead of depending on the get call, let's say it's we're going to take a look at a second here at the widget service, and it's going to be get all, and having our container local variable that's coming back. No, we're actually going to have our variable just equal to the local variable of the subject, and we're going to point it at that. And when we make our get all call to the service, what we're going to get back from that, what's going to happen is it's going to update and it's going to emit a value onto that stream, and now everybody's going to know about it. Who's ever tried to do this? Because this has been a really big problem within Angular for a while, which is, okay, look, I'm sharing data. I've got it in some service here that we're hoping that all these different components will be able to use, but then we have to create this really wild eventing system to notify all the components, and they all have to subscribe to it and go, oh yeah, now give me the new data, and then I'll try to re-render myself and get things all straightened out. And it works great like the first 3, 4, 5 times. Right? But as then our application grows and it grows in complexity, it just becomes this wild eventing, Wild West deal, and you don't know what's firing what anymore. So really common problem, and that's what this solves. So let's also talk really quick about a subject versus a behavior subject. Did anybody know the difference? So it's not something that's kind of obvious. Really the biggest difference is this, is that a subject's like, hey, here, you can subscribe to it, and as soon as somebody says, hey, here's a new value, it'll give you the new value. That's great, but what if I arrive to the party 5 minutes after it started, or 5 milliseconds in the case of programming, after the party has started? Well, I don't get the data. It's just like, well, no, nothing to report, man. Everything's cool here. Where a behavior subject is actually going to tell me, this is the last value that was emitted. This is the current value that's out there. So go ahead and use this one. So this helps us with our timing issues of making sure, when does my component subscribe? When am I actually getting that data? I don't have to worry about that. So what are we going to create here? What are we going to look at? We're going to take a look at a little bit of sample code to kind of bring this all together. So hopefully you'll be able to see how you'd be able to implement this in your application. Because that's really my hope for you, is that tomorrow you're going to work, you're all jazzed, you're pumped, you get there at 6:30 a.m. and you're like, man, let's code, because you're so excited about how can I do service with a subject, man? So we're going to create a dashboard component. We're going to create a nav bar with a little role control. This is going to be a really simple UI, like that simple of a UI. So it's going to have a nav bar with a role control. So that's up here. Here's the nav bar. This is my dashboard page itself. Then I have 2 controls, one that has a list of users and another one that shows the permissions for it. So there we go. So I have a users list presenter, So the dashboard itself is the controller. And it has the users list presenter and the permissions presenter as well. So, and our nav bar is also a presenter. So we have 1 container, 3 presenters. And then we're going to share the same exact user data between the 2 the users and permissions. All right, so let's get started. Let's take a look at our dashboard page and kind of dig into this. So before we look at code, I'm just going to show you really quick what it does, and then you guys can just ooh and ah about how awesome this is. And really, it's designed to be super simple so you get the concept, and we don't have a lot of other confusing things going on. So I can select either an admin or I'm a standard user. So when I go to admin, ooh, I have a bug or something's going on here. Well, it looks like I've successfully broken the application. Amongst all the confusion, we'll actually take a look in here and see if it's there's something I've done that's causing that issue. Let's actually, do we have an error here? No. Admin, standard. This is good. This was working just a few hours ago. We'll figure that out as we go here, hopefully. Let me make this just a little bit bigger. This is the curse of the live code thing, right? I mean, that's why I usually have everybody in the front row sign a waiver. Something's going to blow up, and yeah, this happens a lot to me personally. So, all right, let's take a look at our application. So here we've got a module called dashboard. You can tell that it's a module because it's got a dashboard module file here. And then I have 2 folders, one called containers, one called components. I like to be able to separate my containers from my components. The components are my presenters, right? So here, if I look at my container, I've got my dashboard. That's the only one that's in there. My HTML, that's my CSS. My HTML is really simple. All I'm doing here is I've got my nav bar. I'm watching for my change event there. And then I've got my app user list and my app permissions. I'm passing data async pipe down, and all I'm doing on my style is float left, 50-50, boom, we're good. Nice and simple UI here, right? Now, when I look at my dashboard component itself, it's a very simple component as well. Let's go ahead and break this down. So the dashboard component is bringing in the user service, and the user service, now we're going to use, here's our load all call. So that actually might be my problem right there, because I'm changing what the output is, but we'll take a look here. So what I'm doing here is I've got a user's property that is of type observable with a user array. So that's what I'm expecting to get back as a stream of users. So anytime I get an update, man, I'm going to get that. Anytime a value is emitted, I'm going to get that new value, and I'm going to then propagate that down to my children. So I'm going to go ahead and set that user variable, observable variable, equal to the user service users, and then I am going to set the. Oh, that's what it is. So last time I did this talk, it actually, I left some bad code in here, and that's probably what's causing the problem. So the users, as I said, I'm setting that to the service, I'm getting that local variable, and then I'm making my call to the user service using just the word standard. So that's my standard user. And then when the role changes, which you say, well, where does the role change happen? That's what we're getting from the child component, from the nav bar. It's sending the role change up. And when that happens, we're going to call user service list again, but we're going to pass it that role. Okay, so we're just defaulting the first time here to get on the initialization that we're going to start out with a standard user. All right, now everybody cross your fingers. We're going to go back to the page and see if it's working now. Oh, look at that. Okay, I think we might be fixed. So now you can see instead of 3 users, we've got 2 users, and we still have Steve Whitman's name, last name spelled wrong. Sorry, Steve. But we've got Steve and Brian, and then we're showing permissions for Steve and Brian both being standard users. Now when I come over here and I say admin, now since I'm an admin, I can see myself here and any other admins, and I see the full list of users. I go back to standard, and it goes ahead and eliminates that down. Now notice, I'm not doing any crazy eventing. Well, you don't know that yet, but we'll look at here, and you'll see in a second. There's no crazy eventing going on. I'm not doing anything. I'm not having to do a whole bunch of wire up. So because I'm dealing with streams, and I have a service with a behavior subject, the child components are automatically getting updated. So let's dig in a little further here. So we'll come back over to dashboard just to prove it, just so you can all see one last time. Here's our role change. That's where we're getting the role that's being passed up. And again, we're not doing anything magical here. All we're doing is async pipe down to the child with that list of users. So we're unwrapping the observable, and it's getting just an array. So now let's go look at our actual, these are our presenters. And the first one we're going to look at is the top nav. The top nav is actually more complicated than it needs to be, and mostly just because we just have these two options in here, and we're not loading those in a more traditional way. They're just hard-coded in there. But on the change of this is where we're calling our on-roll change. There's nothing else magical happening there. And the second part here, as you can see, on roll change, all we're doing is we're emitting the role that is selected. At this point, this is our model. We're actually using two-way data binding here. Don't tell anybody. This is on the web, though. So you can see I've got my output, and I've got my role change event emitter of type string. That's going to emit then whatever the role is, whether it's admin or it's a standard user. Great. So now if we come over here to our users list, it's really nothing more than saying, hey, let's use NG4, use our decorator there to enumerate over users, and we're displaying the user ID and the username. No magic, okay? If we look at what's actually in here, it's nothing. In fact, actually, both of these could be deleted. Implements on a init could be deleted, and that's as simple as my component could really be. It's only receiving the input. Now, who would rather test this component and write unit tests for this one, or the one that we were talking about that's got, you know, a couple of services injected, we got some other inputs, and we got this nasty if-then, and try to figure out whether or not it does the right thing, right? Captain Obvious here, right? This is the one we all want to test. This is the reusable component. If you wrote all your components like this and did presentation components that actually display the data, this is massively reusable. People from other teams will be able to take your components and be able to wire them up, give them the data that they want, and then handle the click events that they want. That's a beautiful thing. Set that back, otherwise I'll forget, and of course it'll break when I do my next presentation. All right, so the permissions one, it's the same exact thing. We're not displaying the ID, we're just displaying the name and the role, but all we're doing is enumerating over the users in it. All right, great, so where's the magic at? How's this actually happening? Well, we briefly touched on it in the container for what's really the magic happens here, the user service, and right here. So why don't we go take a look at that really quick and see what's happening there. So over here, I'm going to show you two different versions. I'm going to show you first the widget service, because this is the really simplified version, and then we'll talk about why the user service was done just a little bit different than this. Okay, one, by the way, this is using in-memory database, so we're not actually connecting out to an API. The code here is available in a repository. I will post this to our feed so you can get it, and you can pull down the source code. You can pull down the slides. You can, we'll actually have some videos. We'll have some links for you on that as well. I have a video available to you so you can hear my wonderful voice again, walking you through all these different examples. So in my case here, you see I've got a widget, and so here I've got widget $ equals a new behavior subject, and it's a widget array. So, and then we're defaulting it with an empty array right there. So as you see here, empty array. So this is what's creating our behavior subject, and this is what we're connecting to from our container component. So now we point at that, and anytime that we get a new value on widgets $, those values are going to then be emitted to onto the stream, and we'll pick those up automatically. So in our case here, we've got a call called just get all, and it should look very familiar to you. It's using the HTTP client, and it's calling a get, and we're specifying the type, but it should be a widget array. And we're subscribing to that, and we're taking the widgets that are returned, and we are calling next on those widgets and doing it like that. So the beauty here is that now we're updating this behavior subject. It's getting those widgets for us. As you guys may know, the HTTP client will auto-destroy itself, so we don't actually have to worry about it. We're not doing any other operations on it that would prevent it from doing garbage collection. So this is okay. So I've got my subscribe here. It's getting that value emitted onto it, and nice and simple. But this isn't the actual example that we use with the user service. So let's take a look at that one next. So the user service is a little bit more complex, but it's basically the same thing. We've got our behavior subject up here. We've got our variable that's exposed for that, so that we can go ahead and bind to that. And then we have a function called list. List is what we are using to be able to get either the admin version of the list or the standard version of the list. So we pass that in on the roll. We're using the same type of get, making that call out there, and then we're subscribing, taking the users, and we are putting in a new value onto the stream using next. But here we're doing something a little different. And imagine now, again, we're using a real API here. If it was a real API, we wouldn't do it this way because we wouldn't need to. The API, up on the server would say, hey, let's go ahead and eliminate and only show admin versus, or show all with admin, or show just the limited with the standard. But since our service here needs to kind of fake a few things out, this is how we chose to do it to make it simple. But the widget one is actually what you'd really want to do. Does that make sense? I want to make sure that that was clear for everybody. So when you do write it, this is more of what you want it to look like. This here is our poor man's filtering version here, so we can make our UI work the way that we want without having a real service or all that overhead. All right, so great. I think we're doing pretty good on time here. So in summary, the container presenter maximizes reusability. And honestly, if you don't even use the service with the subject, if all you get from tonight is, hey, I'm going to start working with container presenter and I'm going to try to start simplifying my applications, then hallelujah, like that's a huge plus for you. This is going to make your life a lot easier. You're going to write better code, and you're going to have team members love you because your components are going to be reusable and theirs are not, right? So hopefully everybody starts to adapt this. This is a really easy concept to use, but it's one that escapes us in the Angular world, and I'd really like to see more people using it. So the other part here is service with a subject to share data. Notice how easy it is to be able to share data, and you could have multiple different containers on different pages. Let's say like you load your permissions in once, or you load your roles in once on your auth service. You don't have to, you can reuse those from container to container to container, and then all of a sudden, let's say if you switch to an impersonation mode and it loads up a new set of roles, and makes some changes there, bam, your components are automatically going to get updated with those. You don't have to do anything special. And that is huge in being able to do complicated pages. And the best part here is it's going to be really easy for you to upgrade to NgRx if you want to. The great thing about NgRx, and I'm a huge proponent of it, so it's funny for me to do a talk called I'm Not Ready for NgRx. Everybody, no, you're ready, let's do it. But the great thing about this is that your application doesn't NgRx. In fact, a really common scenario that we see a problem with application development is basically teams go to the nth level to make sure that every page does NgRx. And maybe we don't actually need to do that. Maybe it actually makes more sense to say pages and let's have them use the store. That's the really appropriate way to do this. And that the other pages that are more simple, that will actually just use service with a subject. So we're now still have really clean pages. We're still very consistent in how we do things. Really complex goes this way. Not as complex can go this way. And we can build these applications much more quickly and not have to maybe necessarily put everything into the store. Again, that's for you to decide. The GitHub repo, it's pretty simple. If you just go out to GitHub and search for Breebug, you'll find this repo. I will also be posting this on my Twitter stream, just to let you guys know, and Brian briefly covered this. Really, what does Breebug do? We do application development for clients. We don't work on any products ourselves, internally for ourselves. We help clients achieve their dreams and help them build out their next level of enterprise applications. A lot of times it starts out with architecture reviews, just coming in and taking a look around about what are you doing and making sure it's following the best practices that are coming down from the Google team and the Angular team, right? We do some customized training. So I regularly teach training classes, not only here in Denver, but also across the country. We also do Angular consulting and staff augmentation. So if you need help getting a project up and going and get the team up to speed after training, you know, we can be there to help you build, you know, whatever it is that you want to build. Follow me if you would, Jesse S _Breebug. I will be posting, like I said, the slides, the code, and a link to the video tomorrow morning on this. So definitely do that. Also, if you have questions on service with the subject and you want to get some answers and you're like, look, I'm too shy to raise my hand right now because we're going to go to questions in just a second, then email me. That's my real email address. It doesn't go to some pseudo folder. It goes to my real email. So I'm happy to respond, happy to get you some help and point you in the right direction. So with that, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Is there other trade-offs when components get deeply nested as far as like passing things down a long chain of components and then having to output all the way back up as far as like figuring out where things are happening and debugging it?
Yes.
How do you handle that?
Yeah, it can. I think you've got to make logical decisions. So the question, just for the online audience, is that are there special considerations when we talk about nesting components multiple levels deep and passing stuff down and then getting it back up out? Yeah, anytime we're creating a component hierarchy, it needs to be thought out and well planned, and there's some special considerations for that. We definitely don't want to just keep passing stuff, the same data all the way down this chain. We might want to take a look at how we're composing our components and making sure, like, hey, where does it really need to be at, that we're from the container down to the presentation component. I don't think there's any like one prescription that fits all. I think it's on a case-by-case basis, but you want to try to minimize that so that you're not having this huge chain of passing data down. But that's a really good question for maybe an offline. We could go down a rabbit hole, maybe over a beer. What size of T-shirt do you wear?
Medium.
Medium. All right. Can we get a medium? Oh, they're over here. Gotcha. Wow. Hey, cool. Look at that. Here you go.
Awesome.
I got some T-shirts, some swag. We've got the support local software ones, and we've got these cool ones that we did for Angular Denver. So a couple more questions. We'll give away some T-shirts. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I saw the NgRx, and I immediately thought that Angular absorbed RxJS and remade the API. But obviously that's not the case. So with this, you're just going to package.json, NgRx, add it in, and then just pulling it in. And it's like loading your ability to like interact with the components that load up. So you could say it's a chart, click on the chart, and it's taking you somewhere. Is that the purpose of NgRx?
Well, okay, so I'm not totally sure I understand your question, because you're kind of jumping around, and there's a couple things I'm not sure that totally makes sense. But let's talk about NgRx and RxJS and Angular really quick here. So Angular, you've got a lot of choices. You can implement this in a lot of different ways. RxJS is the observables library, and the observables library allows you to deal with streams versus get one shot. Hey, we're out. Okay, you have to now make another call and then resolve that one for you to get a new value. Where streams is like, hey, I can get a pointer to that stream, and as many times as it emits values, I can get new values, and then those automatically get distributed to the children. So that's kind of the base premise for both NgRx and service with a subject. Service with a subject is just a much simpler way of doing things. I don't have to plan out my actions. I don't have to create reducers, effects, selectors, whatnot. And so I'm not sure if that really answers your question.
Yeah, because it was, when I saw it, immediately my brain started making connections to what I already known about it, but I've never heard of the NgRx, so I was like, how does this relate? And I see the Rx in there, so I'm like, it's responsive style. But
Yeah, so NgRx is basically an Angular version of Redux that uses the RxJS library. So Angular's already basically built upon RxJS. So a lot of like the HTTP client that returns everything as observables coming out of there. You can still do promises if you want, if that's what you're comfortable with, but you actually have to convert observables to promises and make that call. But that's I think the power with NgRx is because it is observables, and we now have streams of data versus just a one-off. Hey, here's my data. So another great one that we can probably sit down and chat with a beer over here. All right, what size of the t-shirt do you wear, sir? Medium. All right. Now we're XL. Large. All right. Do you want local software? Or do you want the this one? All right. There you go. Oh, there we go. All right. You, sir.
Yeah. So you went over a good kind of example of how to set things up to move to NgRx. What would you say would be kind of the next step or the next thing to look into in moving to NgRx?
Oh, okay. So the question is, what would be the next steps then of how would I want to, like, how would I prepare to move for NgRx? So in this case here, I would start with looking at my UI. Okay, I would start to look at what are the things that are occurring on this page. Now this, mind you, is a very simple page. And really we have one basic action that's occurring that's obvious, and that is a role change. Okay, so I would want to have a role change action, and what I want to then go ahead and create an action for that. Then the other one's not quite as obvious, and that is I want to load users. Okay, and it's kind of it's not really obvious because it happens, but I don't really see it unless I go look at the code. So in that case there, what we want to have happen is we need to be able to load users, and we need to be able to handle the success block and the fail block. Okay, so if something fails, I want to have a little toaster message that says, hey, something went wrong, not sure, do you want to try again, whatnot. And on the success, I want it to actually update the users piece so that I now have that. So that's the first step, is you're going to start to plan out your actions, and then from those actions, you're going to create reducers. How does that affect then my state in the store? So on the role change, that one's really not going to have a reducer, but it's going to have an effect. Okay, so effects handle my asynchronous effects that happen in the application, and so that would be the one that would be calling to the service, and then on the success of that, you would say, okay, the user success, here's the list of users, update the store with it, and on a failure, it would say, hey, we have a failure one, and then it would do what it's going to do there appropriately, right? And so really in this case here, we'd have three actions that we'd be writing. We'd then have it looks like 2 reducers, and we would have 1 effect method to do the load, and then from there we'd need selectors. So you could also argue in this very simple case that we could actually do the same exact thing that we're doing for filtering, that we could actually do that with selectors instead and be able to do it that way. That once we actually set the role and we have that value, then the selector would automatically, we'd use that role and say, okay, hey, now here's your data based off your role. Okay, but again, it really depends on how your application is really built. Most applications aren't really manipulating the service data like what we're doing for this example. Does that help you?
Yeah.
Okay. What's t-shirt size? XL. All right. I've only got 2 larges in these, and there's a large and an XL. So there you go, sir. Oh, good job. All right. One more question.
Okay, so you showed us a service with a subject example. Can you think of some type of service or data service and subject? Would it be appropriate?
Where would service with a subject not be appropriate? I can't think of a place where it wouldn't be appropriate. Now, you might decide that this is still too complicated and I need NgRx. I need to abstract away additional complexity. But most things could be done with service with a subject. Let me give you an example of this, because this actually might be what you're looking for. So where is it where a service with a subject really wouldn't help me? I'll give you an example. I was working with, does anybody know Joe Eames at all? Or heard of him? So he's a really well-known Pluralsight author. He writes a lot of content on Angular, really great guy. And him and I were collaborating on one of his projects called ngdoc.io. And he had a component page for displaying a list of articles, and it had a really complicated piece around tags. So at first, what he wanted to display is, I'm going to show you a list of popular articles, and then I'm going to give you a list of popular tags. Cool. And then if I click a tag, it would then only show me tags for the remaining articles that are unique, because each article would have multiple tags. So it would show me a unique list of the remaining tags based on the articles that are now being displayed. Okay, great. And then the other option is I can search for tags. And so he had this really nasty logic. There was this really complicated piece, and it needed its own little block header saying, please do not touch. This is highly volatile. We're not quite sure how it totally works, but it kind of does. And it had a lot of these really crazy if-then variable cases. And what we ended up doing with it is we rewrote it into NgRx, and we used selectors to figure out which data to display for tags based on, hey, does get latest from, do we have a search parameter? Yes, we do. Okay, so we know we're only showing tags that that match the search criteria. Do we have a single tag selected? Yes, we do. Now only show tags from, get a list of the articles and get me a unique list of tags for those articles. Service with a subject would not help you. You would still have the complexity. You'd be like, hey, fantastic. I have tag data, I have article data, and I've got a really nice way that I can share and make these simple as behavior subjects, but it's not really reducing my complexity. So that's the one example I can think of. All right, I think you get both of these t-shirts, don't you? All right. Steve's a regular. All right, we'll take one more question. Anybody else? Going once? Going twice? All right, thanks everybody for coming out. Really appreciate it. Again, you can reach me here with my Twitter handle. I regularly respond on that. You can also get me via email. I'll be posting the slides and all the other information. So thanks for coming out. Hopefully we'll see you next door. All right.